What are the characters behind science? This is Science Behind the Glass, illuminating the human side.
In this podcast, we unveil the human side of laboratories and science. Scientists share personal experiences and we discuss their meanings from different perspectives and fields of research.
Welcome to Science Behind the Glass, illuminating the human side. We are here to explore the captivating stories behind groundbreaking scientific research. In today's episode, we are thrilled to welcome Darren Crayn, the director of the Australian Herbarium, to share his experience in the field of plant systematics and evolution. Darren's research focuses on revealing the mysteries of tropical Australia's rich biodiversity, from discovering new plant species to mapping their evolutionary relationships and ancient migration pathways. With a combination of traditional and cutting-edge technologies, his work not only sheds light on the intricate web of life, but also highlights the importance of understanding our natural world in a rapidly changing environment. Thank you, Darren, for accepting this invitation. It's a pleasure to having you here.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here, Linda. Thanks for inviting me.
Darren, what leads you to study plants?
That's a good question to start off with. Well, I have to say, I'm not one of those people who is in a career I imagined myself in when I was a child. You know, I don't remember having an interest in plants when I was a kid, but what I did have was a really strong interest in nature. Now, I remember always being outside whenever I could be and just looking at things, looking at bugs, looking at trees, looking at grasses, mostly looking for the animals, but and watching birds and all of those sorts of things. But I never thought I would be a botanist. It's never a career I was even aware of because I grew up in a small country town in regional Australia. And because I had an interest in science, I guess, I was advised by my school careers advisor to go and study engineering, which is what I actually did.
So you studied first engineering.
I did, but not for very long. So I realized quite soon after studying an engineering degree that really wasn't what I wanted to do.
Fair enough. That's important.
But it all started with an interest in nature broadly. And then through some happy accidents, I guess, I've ended up being a botanist.
Oh, okay. That's nice. Do you have a mentor that maybe guide you to this path of studying plants?
It was I ended up getting a job when I was an undergraduate student in my third year. I ended up getting a part-time job in a laboratory at university in a botany lab where they were doing plant genetics. And up until that point, I thought I wanted to be firstly an engineer in my first year of university. But then after I realized I didn't want to be an engineer, I thought I wanted to be a zoologist. So I enrolled in a zoology and botany degree, but most of the subjects I took were zoology subjects. And it was only really until I got that experience working in that botany lab and was around botanists all of the time that I started to think, well, plants are pretty cool too.
Oh, lucky for us.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot fewer botanists than there are zoologists, so there's not so much competition.
Oh, great. Maybe I'm going to jump to working with plants. Yeah. What is plant evolution in simple words, and why do you decide to work on that particular topic?
So plant evolution, really, when we study plant evolution, we're asking the question, we're making an observation first. And the observation is when you look outside, you see lots of different kinds of plants. And then you go somewhere else to another country or another continent and you see lots of different kinds of plants, but they're different ones. And so the observation is there are lots of species out there and species are different between different places. And that leads to the question, why? How has this happened? How has this diversity come about? And why is it different parts of the world have different groups of species? And so that is the study of evolution. It's the study of the processes that have led to the diversity we see today.
That's a fantastic way to explain. How do you think understanding plant evolution can benefit everyday people behind just the scientific community?
Well, it's no secret that nature is our life support system. Virtually everything we need as humans, we derive from nature, either directly or indirectly. Our oxygen is produced by plants. Our water cycle is influenced by biodiversity. Our food, of course, is all biological, and the great majority of it comes directly from plants. And what doesn't come directly from plants comes through animals, which feed on plants. So even our climate systems are very strongly influenced by plants and animals. So if we want to live sustainably, if we want to leave for our children a world where they may enjoy the luxuries that we've had and the systems that we've had to support us, then we need to make decisions that are good decisions that ensure that life's support systems can continue to function.
But that biodiversity is important, right?
Absolutely. And so in order to make good decisions about how we maintain life support systems, we've got to understand how those life support systems work. So it's just like a car. If you don't understand what the impact of putting the wrong kind of oil in your car is going to be, then you're going to make a bad decision. And it's the same with biodiversity. It's the same with Earth's life support systems. If we don't understand what the long-term impacts will be of decisions we make today, then we're going to make bad decisions, and that's going to be catastrophic for future generations. So, simplistically, it's important to our survival as organisms that we understand our place in nature and how nature works to support us. But even beyond that, even philosophically, it sustains us mentally and psychologically to interact with nature. We all get a mood lift when we interact with nature. When people go on bushwalks, when people go to parks, when they see birds singing, when they smell flowers blooming. It's known, psychologists and mental health experts have shown this many times over. It really lifts people's moods. That interaction with nature, we are biophilic organisms. Because we are organisms ourselves, we know we depend on all other organisms for our survival. And when we have that interaction, we're better off as people. So there's two angles to it. We need healthy ecosystems to sustain us in terms of our food, our water, our air. But we also need to interact with healthy ecosystems to sustain our mental health.
And I guess that adding to that is like we know how the plants, for example, are evolving or changing according to our climate or environmental variables. We are going to be able to tackle different problems, right?
Absolutely.
Mapping the distribution of ecosystems and genetic variation within a species sounds like putting together a gigantic puzzle. How do you even begin to tackle such a complex task?
Sometimes I wonder. I think the best way is to start small. Start with a specific question. That's what we all do in science, don't we? We ask a question. Everything starts with a question. The question leads to a hypothesis, and that's something that we can test with data and analysis. So in trying to piece together an understanding of Earth's biodiversity, which is exceedingly complex, as you know, then I think the best approach is to start with a specific question. And that question may be curiosity-driven. It may be something as simple as, what tree species can I find within 1 kilometre of where I'm sitting now? That's a fairly simple question, and it should be easy to answer. And that's curiosity-driven. We might start with a question that one of our stakeholders puts to us. So it may be the government is asking us to determine whether there are any threatened species on a piece of land that a developer has proposed to build houses on. That's a specific question, and then that may launch a research project. We may have another question that relates to, why are there two populations of a particular species, but those populations occur 1,000 kilometres apart? How can that be? Are those two widely separated populations there because there was a formerly much more widespread continuous distribution, and climate change has eliminated the members of that species, eliminated almost all of the members of that species and just left two isolated populations? That's one explanation. Or is it that one population has migrated or dispersed into a far-flung locality? That's another explanation for the observation that you have these two widespread, or these two distinct, widely separated populations.
And you use different tools, like in this case, genetics and morphology, to identify these differences, to mapping these ones, to answer those questions.
Absolutely, absolutely. We use a range of different tools to understand biodiversity. Traditionally, we've used morphology. We've measured lengths and breadths and colours and sizes of body parts, if you like, because 100 years ago, those were the only tools that were available to us, observational tools that were available to us. Now, of course, we sequence genes and we can compare the genetic code of individuals, and we can understand or investigate to what extent two individuals are related to each other. And then we can sort of look more broadly, of course, and then ask questions about, well, how are species related to each other genetically? And then we can do really interesting things like determine how quickly genes are evolving, and then use that as a kind of a molecular clock or molecular timescale to then back predict how long ago particular species evolved or particular lineages diverged from each other. And so we can look back in time and piece together our evolutionary history by comparing the genes of species that are living today. Wow. And it gives us another way to look back in time, whereas traditionally we've been restricted to using fossils. And fossils are the best way of understanding the past because they are direct evidence. But when we use genes to look back into the past or back predict past evolutionary events, it's indirect evidence, so not quite as good as fossils, but because the fossil record is generally so patchy, for most organisms, we have a very poor fossil record or no fossil record at all. So all we can do really is to use these indirect methods for most species.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Sounds like a toolkit.
Like a toolkit. It's like a telescope into the past.
Yes, exactly. How does climate change impact the work you do in studying plant systematics and evolution in regions like Australia and other tropical regions?
Yeah, good question. Some of the work that we do is me specifically about trying to understand or better understand what impact climate change might have on biodiversity. So one of the projects I've been deeply involved with in the last 5 years is working in the cloud forests of the tropical areas of northeastern Australia, where we are today, Linda. And the cloud forests are the high altitude forests of the wet tropical region, and they generally occur above about 1,000 meters of elevation. And they're called cloud forests because, a lot of the time they're bathed in clouds. And so they're kept much wetter by the presence of that cloud than forests lower down and closer to the coast. So they have unique ecosystems, different species to forests lower down. And we know that one of the impacts of climate change will be that cloud base, the altitude at which clouds typically exist, will rise. So the clouds will form higher. And so that will mean that parts of those cloud forests will lose their cloud cover. And that's likely to seriously impact the amount of water that's available to those species, as well as changing the temperature profile. So we've been doing a lot of surveys in the cloud forests of the Australian wet tropics region, which has been enormous fun, but also very, very challenging. And the point of those surveys is to try and get a better picture of what plants occur there, how abundant they are, and also to launch a kind of a rescue mission. So we've done some predictive modelling that on where the climate niche that those particular plant species now occur in, where that climate niche will be in 50 and 100 years' time. And the climatic conditions that now characterise the mountaintops of the Australian wet tropics won't exist in 50 years' time. It'll be quite different up there. So the area of suitable habitat for the species that exist there now will have disappeared largely in 50 years' time. So we don't know if the plants will survive that change or not, but we don't want to have to wait to find out either. So what we're also doing is taking cuttings and seed from many of those species that are found only on those mountaintops and growing them in partnerships with various botanic gardens along the east coast of Australia to build up what we call these ex situ or off-site conservation collections as an insurance policy, really, against climate change wiping out these plants in their native habitat.
Wow. And you also can measure the tolerance of these plants that actually they're under that level, and to see even under climate change conditions how they are going to perform or not perform at all? Or just
Yeah,
die?
that's an interest. Yes, that is part of the project too. So it's a large collaborative project that involves, you know, people like me, but also plant physiologists and seed biologists, seed scientists. And there are some interesting results coming out of the physiology. So what the physiology researchers have been doing is growing some examples of some of these plants in temperature and carbon dioxide controlled glass houses to see what happens if you warm them up a little bit and add a bit of carbon dioxide. And interestingly, they grow a bit better. So
Unexpected.
so well, it's not really unexpected when you think about it, because they're quite challenging conditions for plant growth on these mountaintops, because it can get quite cool up there. So they're not really limited. They're limited a little bit by temperature. So if you warm it up a little bit, they grow a bit better, and that's not a surprise. So, and also the seed biologists are reporting that germination increases when you warm up the seeds a little bit. So we think the impacts of climate change on these plants, the negative impacts of climate change on these plants, is not really going to be about the temperature, but is going to be in terms of the plants being able to survive hotter conditions or slightly hotter conditions. But we think that what the impacts are going to be is on the relationships that the plants have with other organisms that they depend upon in those ecosystems. In particular, the insects that are pollinating them, and diseases that may not yet occur on those mountaintops because it's too cold, but may actually become really problematic when it warms up a bit. So most plants depend upon insects for pollination and therefore for reproduction. And many insects, particularly in cold climates, have very short life cycles. So they only emerge from their eggs and their pupal stages for short periods of time, and are available to pollinate for short periods of time, and then they disappear again. Now, if the timing of flowering becomes out of synchrony with the timing of emergence of the pollinators, then you're going to have reproductive breakdown. And those are the sorts of impacts we think climate change are going to have. They're going to change the synchrony between flowering and emergence of pollinators. And the effects are going to be that those pollination services may no longer be available for the plants, which means reproduction is going to be compromised. And over the long term, those plants may well disappear from those landscapes because they can't reproduce.
Oh, that's quite serious.
Could be, yeah. But of course, we know very little about it. It's very hard to do observational ecology in some of these landscapes because there are no roads to most of these mountaintops, and it's very difficult to access them, and then very difficult to do long-term experiments, observational experiments. So we have very little actual observational data on these sorts of questions.
And I imagine that it's difficult to just track the interactions with insects, right?
Absolutely. You've got to be there watching them, or and this is where technology can help, of course. We set up cameras and semi-automated systems to monitor these things, but that requires funding, and that requires people, and there are lots of other questions out there that some people regard as higher priority.
Wow.
For
That's amazing.
Any budding botanists and ecologists out there, there's still plenty of work to do.
Oh,
Never
that's an
be short of the
invitation.
question.
That's scary, but that's amazing what you are doing and tracking all these possible or probabilities that disappearance of these plants and the relevance of the interactions with other animals too. So changing a little bit of the topic, your role as a director of the Australian Herbarium is quite prestigious. Could you share with us your journey and the path that led you to become a director? We would love to hear about the experiences and milestones that shaped your career trajectory.
Yes, of course. So I did mention I thought I wanted to be an engineer. At least I was convinced by somebody else that I wanted to be an engineer. It turns out that I didn't. So I studied zoology and ecology, and then sort of went a little bit sideways into botany because of a chance encounter, really, with a botanical academic who was looking for someone to wash glassware in his lab. And so I took a part-time job in a botany lab, and just by hanging out with botanists for a while, I became much more interested in plants than I had previously been. So that part-time job led to me doing an honours year, a research project in plant systematics. and I quite enjoyed that. And my supervisors thought I did a reasonable job, so they offered me a PhD program afterwards. They'd just got a grant and needed a PhD student to work on this particular group of plants that are related to heath plants and rhododendron. So that I wasn't sure I wanted to be a botanist at that point. I was still unsure about where I wanted to go with my career. And in fact, the other thing I was considering doing at that point was pursuing another one of my long-term passions, which is music, particularly guitar playing. So at that point, when I was offered a PhD program, I was seriously considering going back to university and doing a degree in music, particularly jazz guitar. So I was a little bit torn, and I had to think hard about what I really wanted to do. Did I want to go back to be an undergraduate student and be poor for another 3 years and not know whether I was ever going to make it as a guitarist? Or did I want to take the certainty of a PhD program and a scholarship? And I chose that. I chose to be a botanist because I thought, well, I can always continue to do music on the side.
Yeah, good decision.
But the idea of pursuing a career being a researcher was really appealing because I was really interested in asking questions, as all scientists are. So anyway, I did the PhD, and after that, I saw a position advertised for a postdoctoral researcher with the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in the Republic of Panama, and it was to work on bromeliads, the evolution of bromeliads. And I thought that would be super interesting. But I looked at it and went, well, I'm not going to be competitive for that because there's going to be hundreds of candidates from all over the world that are going to want a prestigious position like this. And so I kind of thought I wouldn't bother applying. But I just mentioned it to my PhD supervisor, who said to me, stop being an idiot. Just make the application, because there's only one way you can guarantee you're not going to get the job, and that's if you don't apply. So he said, just make the application and see how you go. You might get lucky. And you know what? I got lucky.
Wow.
I ended up being shortlisted for the job, and then they offered it to somebody else, and who was a much better candidate than me, because this other person had done a PhD on bromeliad evolution. So they were much better positioned. But that person decided not to accept the offer. So because he was offered another job that was much better, a much more secure position. So in the end, it was offered to me as the second choice candidate, and I went, absolutely, thank you very much, I'll take this. So I went off to Panama and spent 2 years in Panama, and then after that 1 year at the University of Oxford in the UK, where a collaborator on the bromeliad project was based. So in all, it was 3 years, 2 years in the neotropics and 1 year in the UK, and it was a fantastic intellectual environment in both places. You know, the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute is world famous for very good reason, as is Oxford University. So it was a wonderful experience. But of course, it all had to end at some point, and once the 3 years was up, I came back to Australia and started looking for positions here, and with my partner at the time, my now wife, and didn't have much luck for about a year. I was working 3 or 4 different jobs simultaneously for about a year. I was being a tutor at the university, and I was doing 1 day a week part-time research on the human genetics, and 1 day a week part-time research on a botanical project. And so, you know, it's just
biologist's life.
Biologist's life, yeah, exactly. You know, just doing lots of different things to keep the income coming in.
I feel familiar with that.
And I think everybody goes through that career stage, don't they?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. You just do what you have to do until the opportunities land for you. And so then after doing that for about 18 months, a position came up at the Botanic Gardens in Sydney, in the research herbarium in the Botanic Gardens in Sydney. And the position was for a tropical botanist. And so I thought, well, I'll give that a go. You know, I've got some experience in the tropics, and I was fortunate enough to get that job. And so I was very happily employed as a research botanist at the New South Wales Herbarium for about 5 years. And I thought that was my job for life. You know, I thought, this is it. This is fantastic. It's a permanent job in a fantastic institution in the city I want to live in, doing full-time research. I could not have asked for anything better. But then I heard on the grapevine that James Cook University, where we both are, in Cairns here, was planning on establishing a tropical research herbarium. And I thought, well, that'd actually be really fantastic, because most of my research, even though I was based in Sydney, most of my research was in Northern Australia. And so I thought, well, that actually could be really, really interesting. Maybe I'd consider applying for that. And then when they finally established the herbarium and then advertised the position for director, they created the position at the level of a full professor. And so I rang up my contact at JCU and I said, oh, that's really unfair. I really wanted to go for that director position, but you've advertised it at a level which is way too high for me. I'll never be competitive at that level. Because at that time in Sydney, I was only just a research scientist. I wasn't even a senior research scientist. And then I thought, but applying for a professor's position was way out of my league.
And your director says the same, like, I need to apply.
Yeah, exactly. I thought, well, nice idea, but I'm never going to be competitive. But this person who I talked to said to me, well, there's only one way you can guarantee not getting the job, and that's not making an application. Yeah, well, you're right. And it worked for me before. I made an application for a job in the past, the Panama job that I thought I wouldn't be competitive for, and it worked out. It worked out well. So I thought, I'll give it a go. And I gave it a go. And you know what? I got lucky again.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I ended up in a position that I think I was seriously underqualified for, but clearly the panel either had a really bad field of candidates or they saw something in me that I wasn't aware of and I couldn't see in myself. And so I guess my advice to other people who may be suffering the same sort of imposter syndrome that we all suffer from and continue to suffer from is if someone you respect tells you you're good enough, believe them.
True.
Because they probably know you a lot better than you know yourself.
Yes.
At least they're a much more independent and independent observer of your capabilities than you are, because we all suffer from that imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah, that's true.
We all think we're not good enough. We all think we're here on false pretenses, and everyone thinks we're
sabotaging ourselves all the time.
Exactly. And so both of the times I've applied for jobs that I thought I was underqualified for, I ended up applying because someone I respected told me I should, and both times it worked out well.
Yes, lucky you, but not that lucky. I think that is it's good that being pushed a little bit, and then when you have all the qualifications and you have been working hard and you have the experience, that shows, not only the lucky.
Yeah, that's right. And now I'm in a position where I employ people, and what I always look for in a candidate for positions that I advertise is someone who believes in themselves. And so perhaps that's what convinced the people who employed me that maybe I was worth a try. It was that perhaps I demonstrated that I was willing to give it a go, willing to push myself and step out of my comfort zone and go for things that perhaps were a bit of a stretch for me.
Lucky for them. We are lucky to have you there.
I'm still feel very lucky to be here, I can tell you.
Discovering new plant species sounds like something out of the adventure movie. Can you share any exciting stories from your fieldwork or expeditions? You should have tons of them. But
there's a few interesting stories. Most of them horror stories.
With leeches.
The leeches. I can talk about leeches. Yeah, I can talk about leeches. One of the things about the mountaintop cloud forests is they're full of leeches. I can remember one trip I took. It was a 3-day trip, and we had to walk to the top of the mountain. It was 1,000 meters high, and then spend 3 days up there and walk back down. And it rained pretty much the whole time. So it was horrible weather, and it was cold, and the leeches were epic. I remember one time walking around on one of the days, we were just walking around, and I opened my rain jacket, and the inside of the rain jacket was just covered in leeches.
That's a horror movie.
Yeah, and one of the guys I was there with tapped me on the back, and he said to me, "I can you just have a look at my eye? It feels a bit scratchy." And so and it was raining the whole time, and so I looked at his eye and I went, "Yeah, there's blood coming out of your eye, so I reckon that might be the problem." And what we think had happened was that a leech had gotten into between his eyeball and the inside of the eye socket.
Oh,
and attached to the eye socket and fed and then dropped out. And what we were seeing was the blood just coming out of the wound that the leech had left there. And he didn't even know the leech had gone in and fed.
Oh.
He only sort of noticed once it had let go and fallen out, presumably.
I had the same problem when I was in Mount Louis. I was helping Aaron.
Yep, Aaron.
Yes. So we went there, and I have something in my eye, like so itchy, so scratchy. Can you check? It's like because he has this strong accent. So the one that has a strong accent, it's like it's a leaf. It's like a leaf. So when I look, it was a leech. I'm like, there's a leech in my eye. Oh, it was a horror movie. It was there feeding, and I managed to flick it out.
Oh, he did. Wow. Okay, so it's happened to you too. I think most people who've spent a lot of time in Australian tropical rainforests have good leech stories.
Oh, yes. And so welcome to the tropics.
Welcome to the tropics. But, I think if the leeches are the worst thing that can happen to you in a tropical rainforest, that's great. We don't have tigers. We don't have bears. We've got lots of snakes, but you hardly ever see the snakes. So they're actually quite safe compared with
and they don't transmit any disease, which is good.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fun.
That was a horror story. Oh, one thing that happened, sometimes you discover new species, and that's always a thrill, but mostly you don't realize it at the time. Mostly if you're collecting plants, you bring them back to the herbarium and then you compare your collections against what's already in the herbarium. And it's usually only then that you have that moment where you realize what you've collected is something new. But sometimes you actually realize it in the field. And it happened to me most recently about a year ago, and it wasn't even a plant. I was just doing a little bushwalk on a weekend for fun up to a waterfall in the wet tropics. And we just took this little walk along this trail, and it's quite a popular walking trail around near Cairns. And I was just looking at a few plants because that's what I do. And I saw this odd bracket fungus on this living plant, this small shrub. And in fact, I didn't even go to the shrub to look at the bracket fungus. It was flowering at the time, and I went over it to look at the flowers. And then I noticed this little bracket fungus on it. And I thought that's a bit odd because normally bracket fungi grow on dead plant matter. So I thought. I thought, well, I'll collect this. We have a fungi expert back in here at JCU. So I brought the specimen back, and he went, oh, that's definitely a new species of fungus. I went, oh, that's nice.
Wow.
And he said, that, it's not uncommon for a fungus expert, a mycologist to walk out into the tropics on a weekend and find new species. It happens all of the time because
in the backyard.
In the backyard, on their food, because fungi is so poorly known, and there are so many more species of fungi on Earth than there are plants that it's almost normal to find new species if you know what you're doing.
Wow!
Every time you go out.
Yes, going just for a walk and just relax and chill, and you discover a new species.
Exactly, and I felt, well, that's great. Here I am, a botanist. I know almost nothing about fungi, and here I've discovered a new species.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you, Darren. That's all the questions that I have for today, and we are so happy to have you here. Pretty sure that they are going to enjoy listening to you and your adventures. And thank you for sharing all this time, all your personal stories with us.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. Well, thanks very much for inviting me, Linda. It's been great fun.
Inspiring interview. Importance of understanding nature. This is not a question that many people ask themselves. Maybe for many, the answer is to take advantage of it or exploit it. What do you think, Danny?
Yes, I agree. It's very difficult to find people that is genuinely interested in understanding nature, and maybe from a merely curiosity point of view, or maybe in a professional point of view. But sometimes people just study nature to try to find a use for it, not to understand their processes or mechanisms.
Yes, I agree. We are past an important topic during the interview, is that many people may not know what is the purpose of an herbarium for an start. What is an herbarium? An herbarium is a collection of plants that includes information of the organisms or species, the location where it was found, and the function of this herbarium is to gather and guard the botanical samples and the data associated.
Yes, that's right. So, knowing this, one may wonder, what is the social value of an herbarium, both for scientists and for the general public? Well, it serves as a repository of invaluable botanical knowledge, offering insights into the adaptations of plants in diverse environments. And this is also important for the general public because the communities have an intimate relationships with the plants, even if sometimes they don't realize it.
Yeah, it's like detectives. Scientists use herbarium specimens to track the evolution of plants and understand how they respond to changing conditions. This knowledge is essential for addressing environmental challenges and conserving biodiversity. Making herbarium collections is indispensable for getting resources for both researchers and the public alike.
Yes, that's right. For example, when communicating climate change results, it's difficult if the public doesn't know what are we talking about. It can be hard to the public to understand, for example, what a set of data represent. When he told us, our interviewee, that some results of our research showed that plants grow better in global warming scenarios, that can be misinterpreted. It's hard to show that there are limitations on that results and that to interpret them, we have to consider multiple factors. This case shows the struggle of scientists communicating the urgency of global change and their potential repercussions.
It is crucial to recognize that climate change can lead to misinterpretations, especially when plants thrive in certain conditions. This is linked to the fact that organisms cannot exist in isolation. They are part of a larger interconnected system. When an organism or a plant is affected, it triggers a cascade of effects on our ecosystem, species, and communities. Failing to grasp this interconnectedness oversimplifies the issue and neglects its true implications. Climate change affects all ecosystems, highlighting the urgent need for a deeper understanding of our planet's intricate balance is necessary.
Yes, that's right. And going to another struggle that commonly face scientists, our interviewee also mentioned, for example, the imposter syndrome. This is the sensation of less worthy value on their people work or their achievements for people that suffer this kind of sensation. It's like the subconscious tells you that you are not competent. A common self-perception that people with imposter syndrome have is that they attribute their success to luck. They constantly compare themselves with others, thinking others are better.
Many scientists suffer of the imposter syndrome, doubting their abilities and feeling like they don't belong. However, it is crucial to recognize that sometimes taking the lead despite our insecurities is necessary for growth, professionally and personally. We must not underestimate the value of our efforts and contributions in every scientific field. Each individual works play a role in advancing knowledge and understanding, underscoring the importance of acknowledging and valuing our own contributions to science.
Yes, that's right. I think those are very important messages that this interview gave us. So, to finish, this episode was inspiring by curiosity and the article Press for Space. We leave the reference to this material in the episode description. And again, this podcast is self-funded, self-published by its host. You can find us on YouTube channel, Spotify, and our official website. Follow us on social networks like X, Facebook, and Instagram. The original music by our colleague and friend Bernardo Aguila.